So I think we'll start, Ed, with your current campaign. This is your second go around, and would love to just hear from you as a starting point. What is it that you learned from the first bid for council? What are you bringing additionally to your campaign, to your aspirations this time, that maybe the first time around you either didn't know about or didn't have the experience to kind of fine tune?
Well, to answer the first part of your question first, the main difference is that I learned not to campaign in a pandemic, where 100% of the campaign is done in interviews. The few times that I tried to go door to door, ringing the doorbell with my mask, stepping back, they still didn't answer the door mostly. So that's one. Secondly, it reiterated it's tough to win against incumbents, which last time effectively was 3 of the 4 people that actually were elected. So in terms of this time, I think that in terms of me as a candidate, I'm the same guy. You know, I'm doing the same kinds of things, only more of them for over the years. And I've joined the housing element because I wanted to get in really at the grassroots on this issue that I'm so passionate about personally, as well as for the city, and worked with that really outstanding group at the grassroots level, which has been really fun. And now it's really fun being in front of physical people at coffees and things like that, because you can just really listen to their emotion around certain things. And the one thing that I would say that I'm seeing differently on a couple of issues, but on one of them being housing, I'm not hearing anybody in any neighborhood say, no, we don't want any housing, or we don't want any affordable housing. And that is more of a pure message than was happening last year. So part of it's because obviously it's been very much in the news with the allocations from the state. Part of it, I think, is people really get it with respect to wanting some teachers and policemen to live in their neighborhood, not in Tracy. But I'm finding interest in that, as well as saying, let's get on with it. So I would say that that's one distinctive difference.
That's really interesting. So you've seen the opinion sort of crystallize a little bit more, where there was some contention before. Now it seems like the majority are going towards an acceptance of additional housing and just trying to figure out what that looks like for the future, not pushing against it.
I wouldn't put any percentages on 2 years ago, but I'm not getting any pushback now. And I'm particularly pushing affordable housing, but they're not pushing back on anything, including when that indicates some need for height limits.
Okay. And I want to take this opportunity to introduce to you, if you haven't already met, Adam Dawes.
I haven't.
Who is our new chief.
All right. Be nice to Bill.
Boy, how quickly they switched horses here.
Great to meet
There's
you.
this other guy, Bill Johnson, who happens to be on the call, but anyway.
Right.
He's the one who's going to ask you the hard questions. I'm still trying to get up to speed. So I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with the team here and offer your perspectives on all the issues, so that our readers we can help inform our readers on who they are best, who would best align with their own views. So
it's a critical service, as I've said to Bill before for many years, and you guys are the best at it. So really salute all the effort you put into it.
Thank you.
So speaking of Rena, then, I've heard you say that you don't want the pressure to fulfill the state obligations to lead to bad decisions in terms of types of housing that the city allows to be developed. At the same time, you know, we've heard this kind of drumbeat over and over again from the developers saying that, you know, the numbers aren't penciling out. Therefore, we need incentives. We need some relaxation of standards. And I'm curious, with the levers that are available for the city to use to encourage greater housing development.
You froze.
Which ones do you see as the best approaches? Whether is that relaxation of height limits, increasing density, parking, lowering of parking requirements. What are you envisioning?
Hey, Jocelyn, your internet connection is shaky. Do you have a way of working your magic to get it improved?
Yeah, I thought it was.
I think the question was pretty clear, though, like in terms of what zoning adjustments you think the city should take to encourage more housing.
Yeah.
Maybe I tackle it. Well, Jocelyn. Yeah.
Fill in the gaps there.
I'll fill in the question and the answer. One of the things that
Sorry about
one of the things that particularly in the last sort of 4 years we've been working on the Planning Commission is exactly that problem, as you well know. And we've looked at it in a variety of ways, but we came up with this housing incentive program that we just reworked on both the Housing Element Working Group and on PTC. And essentially it's addressing all of those variables. And the hardest ones to look at are the kind of FAR, but we've sort of more focused now on that and not getting too hung up on that, and looking at some relief also on certain of the reductions in parking, not parking light or no parking at all, but dropping that a little bit in certain areas. For affordable housing, there's a complete willingness to look at height pretty universally, but in selected sites, not anywhere in town, as one candidate has said. So using the improved housing improvement program and a decision that planning came up with about 2 years ago now to add housing as an overlay to light industrial on San Antonio, as you know, because you reported it, we've already got 3 programs there, totaling about 200 units. So I think the combination of the housing improvement program, housing incentive program, and just creating new land, which is essentially what we did, has worked, and we're getting very good feedback on that. So I think we made great progress on that already, which gives me even more hope on the things we can do with the housing element. And the other thing, of course, which is there, has had some success and some not, is the PHC. And the value of that is you can just sit down and literally negotiate your project with the council. So that's almost wide open, and pretty close to what I was saying 2 years ago, is that, or actually maybe 4 years ago when we got to Wilton Court, is let's just build it. This is an emergency. Let's not worry about overlays at this point. So I think that those are probably the improvement program and the work we did to just kind of create more land where there isn't housing were really helpful in the PHC.
Okay. We're hearing that that the council doesn't really know how much, when developers say the numbers aren't penciling out, the council isn't receiving the kind of financial data to actually check whether or not the financial incentive isn't there for developers when they're pushing for more benefits or exemptions. And I'm wondering what your thought is on that issue. Is there a way for the council to be able to have a little bit more expertise or information gathering in order to really vet whether or not the developer is pushing beyond what would be quote unquote reasonable in the council's eyes?
Well, I think that's true. And of course, the developer can always decide his level for what pencil out means, because he wants what is called a return on cost. And when we looked at a way of getting housing in the NVCAP in the first pass, we got this very poor analysis from staff that talked about it wasn't feasible because of return on cost. And when I looked at that and said, have you done a sensitivity analysis here? She said, no. I said, well, you're not feasible by 1/100 of a percentage point based on the developer's return preferred. And she even used that word, preferred return on cost. That makes no sense. And I said, what if you add $1 million to this project here? Oh, well, then it pencils out fine. So, well, somewhere in that $1 million for a building that's going to stand here for 75 years, we should have some negotiating room. So I think you're correct. We like to have more data. At the end of the day, they can just keep saying no, and it's competitive. So then we have to find another developer. For somebody that's generally interested, I'd rather just sit down and say, can we shave some things here so you can put something up and we can get on with this thing.
But does Are you satisfied that the city staff has the capability of really providing you the analysis that you and other council members need to assess these things or to even negotiate? I mean, where is that expertise to come from?
Well, the expertise, the staff or its consultants can run spreadsheets ad nauseum, but the sort of line at which the developer is going to say this is feasible or not is up to them. And they use, and so their return on cost, I can't remember what it was, 28% or something like that. But when it doesn't pencil out, I don't think we throw it away. I think we sit down with the developer and say, what can we do? So I do think that there's some active negotiating that needs to be done on what they think is their return on cost. But to directly answer your question, no, I don't think we can get the numbers from staff. We have to get that from the developer, but this passed the staff and put into a staff report. When that doesn't work, then we got to take it a step further. We're not going to get anything done.
Well, but you say we would have to sit down and negotiate, or that's what you desire. Who's the we there?
I think the most effective thing is to have a housing committee on council and have those members have a shot at, when it comes back as no, just sit down with them one-on-one and say, look, we hear it's not feasible to you. What needs to be done here? Because I don't think it can end at the staff discussions.
And there are consultants that you've seen work with the city that you have confidence in that are capable of really assisting you in those negotiations?
Well, it has to be directed by staff or helped by council. So this particular consultant that worked on that said, it's a computer model. It said, is anything taken into consideration in Palo Alto? She said no. She said it's a static model. She offered that. She wasn't being dishonest, meaning it's just what I use everywhere. She used a spreadsheet with no sensitivity analysis. And that's not how I would have set up that study. But if it comes back that way from staff and we throw out a whole project, I don't think we should do that. I think we should say, here's the direction we want and how we want you to refine this. And then we look at, are there areas from our development fees that we can put some money into this project to make it work? Or look, if we give you 3 projects, on 2 of them, can you give us a bit of a discount on your preferred return on cost? So just a normal negotiation.
Yeah, that sounds though like a fix to a problem by doing it yourself. And that doesn't seem like the best way to operate a city, where you're functioning as a council member with perhaps others that bring various different levels of expertise, but not without developing that expertise on the staff, or even through its consultants.
I think it should be through the staff and consultants, but I'm just saying if that fails, I don't want to give up. I mean, that's kind of what happened on the latest discussion with Sobrato. That thing wasn't going anywhere, and a 2-person ad hoc went one-on-one for the negotiations, and it was a breakthrough. We haven't seen it yet on PTC. We don't know where it's going to come out, but it was dead, and now it's resurrected. And I think that's the kind of active stuff the council needs to do, besides just hand everything to staff and hope for the best, because it doesn't always work.
But how about telling the city manager to get that problem solved?
Fine. Doesn't mean that council members shouldn't have any involvement in it.
No, I understand that.
As they did with Sobrato.
Yeah. Okay.
So I want to ask what your vision is for development of El Camino, or the improvement of El Camino, because there's so many different issues that come with that that road, the multiple property owners, the shallow lots, with the Creekside Inn redevelopment. The Barron Park neighbors would love to have a precise plan. Is a precise plan kind of going to be the solution to trying to get some sort of cohesion as development happens along El Camino? What do you see for El Camino, and how do we get there?
Well, if I understand the original premise of your question, El Camino is very long. And are you saying, should it all kind of look the same and be integrated?
I think various sections of it can be developed at various times, but right now there's no kind of cohesive plan. A long time ago, there was this El Camino plan where people were criticizing it as being somewhat canyon-like,
Right. So
because of the concept there. But more recently, we're hearing people call for precise plans when specific developments are being proposed, and they want to make sure that it's not a one-off kind of situation where different developers just bring in different ideas and it becomes a reality because it was the only plan in front of the city at the time.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the question because
Sure.
I wanted to break it down into pieces and say, because
Okay.
it's so long, I don't think we should be going for, necessarily miles of cohesiveness, because we have to get some buildings put up in the meantime. I think that I've had on my website since I opened the website what I call true urban planning, or neighborhood planning, and we're going to be doing some probably new neighborhoods, possibly along El Camino, almost certainly in San Antonio, and that planning has to be from the top down in terms of the vision of what we want in a given area, in a given neighborhood, which frankly is where the NVCAP quote precise plan started off, and then staff got way out off of that and had to be reeled back in. So the idea of the neighborhood is, if we put up a new neighborhood, we can't just put up a skyscraper of units and say we're done. We have to have some open space. We have to have, of course, what always goes with housing is transportation that works for four-wheel vehicles, two-wheel vehicles, bike trails, some retail as is indicated by the particular situation. So it has to be a neighborhood, so that we have a new neighborhood called San Antonio, like we have College Terrace, and it has the attributes of a full neighborhood. That's not dissimilar from El Camino, except for the more traffic there in front of that. So I do think that there should be true urban planning around any neighborhood like that we're building new, or that we are rehabbing, which now is getting more on track than it was with the original staff proposal on the NVCAP, which after 4 years didn't work. So again, that shouldn't go that long before council steps in and gets it back on track. But yes, I think we need some planning around that is more than just one-off buildings with setbacks and light planes and things like that.
Are there ways to do this area planning, since it's happened for East Meadow area and Park Boulevard area with no results, quite honestly? I mean, how do you plan to approach area planning so that it's actually speedier than 4 years and it actually results in what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think it has to start well in advance. In some circumstances, though, it has to even go in parallel. I mean, for example, the council pulled any development for housing for the next essentially 10 years, because it's an 8-year cycle and we haven't started it, from the transit center, because they want to incorporate it into a full downtown plan. But, Gennady were writing about that plan 2.5 years ago, and it hasn't even started yet. And we got to move on some of this housing. So we have to do the best we can. In some cases, we have to say, look, we don't want to preclude anything else going here, but we have a particular project that's going to get us, pick an example, 100 units of affordable housing. Let's put that in there, and then we can develop the rest of the plan, as we go along. Same thing with San Antonio. I originally on PTC said I won't vote for this motion, which I think I actually made, but I won't vote for this motion unless we also do a San Antonio corridor study, because it's a mess transportation wise. And there was a long debate, and we won and we passed it. So that always has to be tied there. We're talking about, if you listen to the current council, we're talking about putting 1,000 units out there, or a few hundred or whatever. That's a lot. So we need to get going on the planning, but I wouldn't turn down these first 3 applications. They're going to put up 200 units because it's moving forward senior housing, for example, which was another identified segment in the housing element that we made a high priority. We're getting that, we're getting affordable, we're getting some market rate. I mean, this is all good news. So we don't shut it down to do a plan for 5 years and then be halfway through the arena cycle and be in trouble.
All right.
Ed, do you feel the source of the problem with this sort of planning delay is the conflict among residents about the overall vision, or is it the bureaucracy is just ill-suited to handle the number of issues that are in front of it? why does it take so darn long to advance these things?
I think, not to oversimplify, but I think it's primarily money and getting to a decision that we're going to go on this and getting the consultants lined up and then going on it. And so, I mean, the downtown plan should be well underway, and it's not, and that's critical for everything we're doing, housing and transportation and train, grade step and all that stuff.
But we see that, yeah, we see that on almost any important public issue. I mean, Cubberley, how many times has Cubberley been studied? I mean, you can tick through a lot of issues and see the same end result, which is a lack of a final council decision and a lack of actually pulling the trigger and implementing it. So my question is really, as you look at all of these kinds of things, what's at the root of it? What needs to be fixed so that the projects don't end up that way? And I think you're saying you need to accelerate them, accelerate the decision-making process, but can you be more clear on that? Well,
I think that we need to look for levers to accelerate them, which is one thing. And if we've gotten anything out of the RENA allocations, it's reasons to accelerate. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and I think that's a good thing. If you like RENA, that's another, if you like these numbers, that's another good thing. If you don't like them, it's still a good thing. But I think there also could be, to your point, Bill, I think there's also sort of a downtown plan is a little bit, fuzzy, as opposed to let's fix Cubberley, and put that building up. So my only point is that if people say, yeah, we need a downtown, if a council says, yes, we need a downtown plan, then vote for it and fund it and do it. If they say we're not going to do that for 5 years, then we can't stop building because we need some more homes. So I do think it's a commitment kind of level beyond just money, to your point. But it's a little bit different than buildings. And of course, Cubberley had the whole school district problem for years that's getting somewhat resolved now. But in part of the money also has to be prioritizing what the city manager has to do with his or her staff. Right. And I've said before, you can't give the city manager 100 top priorities. It's just impossible. And then evaluate that person based on if you only got 90 of them done. It's just ridiculous. So we have to get out our little sticky pads and say, these are going to be A priorities, and these are B priorities, these are C priorities. And if they aren't A's and a downtown plan, for example, goes to B or C, then we ought to accept that. But then we can't just stop and wait for 4 or 5 years. Would the research park be a place where, due to its sole ownership by Stanford, where some sort of an accelerated look at a major conversion to housing there might actually be achievable in a short time period? Absolutely. But that's also the problem and the solution. They don't want to do that. So you're negotiating with one person, and the only entity that's in the way of getting anything done there. And as I've spoken about as well, is that even on the housing element, they've only committed to, I think the number is like 569 units over 10 years. And that's less than 5% of the allocation. And they're the biggest job creator in the whole, impacting the whole city and school district. So I believe council missed an opportunity there, that they should have been having some of these conversations and say, look, we just got to have more than that. We can't wait 10 years. And one of the reasons was the downtown plan, area plan is not going to be done. So we can't do it because we don't know how that's going to work for the building that you owned at 27 University. So we're going to wait 10 years now for Stanford to step up any more on that? I don't get it. Well, so how does it change through your being elected? I mean, we do have a new president at Stanford, and they are, they've had the experience of the GUP disaster. Is it not a good time to really make that relationship, result in something more positive than the stalemate that has existed? Yes, I think the timing is excellent, not partly because we miss getting them more involved in housing element. So we need to repair that relationship, and I think make a lot of positive partnerships of that as a positive partnership. I even thought of on a smaller basis. One of the problems with with renters here is they have nowhere to go, and they're going to be the majority of homeowners here. So not homeowners, but the majority of our residents here within 5 years, and they don't have access to legal services that they understand or that they can get a hold of. Why not get help from Stanford Law School? It's one of the things that we partner on, where they provide that pro bono in a very organized way. I just gave a small example, but there's a lot of ways that we can better cooperate in this partnership. And yes, with respect to the Stanford Research Park there, we should be talking about that. By the way, they are open to talking about it. They're not open to talking about it before the latest deadline, but they are open to talking about it. And I'm absolutely certain that we will have those discussions. There were 2 people on the housing element working group, outstanding citizens that were really, really helpful. And we've also asked them to please take a look at the ground leases for Palo Alto Square to see if we can convert some of that space, which is essentially open space, to potentially a housing tower without even touching the other businesses that are there. So that's ongoing, but that organization doesn't move real fast either. But I think we should be very deeply engaged with them, and I would do it the same way with a housing committee on council to kind of be the one to steer that.
Okay.
Ed, I would love to talk with you about the Castilleja redevelopment process. There were so many reviews, recommendations, different recommendations. And I'd like to know if you could talk to us about how your thinking went in that process, how you got to your final vote, and how your vote reflects some of the values that you're going to bring to council in sorting these very, very difficult situations where people are just not seeing eye to eye and kind of unable to compromise.
Yeah. Perfectly fair question, and appropriate for the amount of resources that we all put into that. By far, that's the most hours consumed on any project that I've had on planning in 6 years. So the starting point for my answer is that we can't let a project like this, that I'll offend some people by saying this now, but in the scheme of things, that is not an A priority. That is not a top priority in the city. And yet it took 6 years to get that thing resolved. And we all know the reasons why. It's in an R1 zone, and they were asking for massive variance and so on like that. But we have to make sure that we resolve that a lot more quickly, because all citizens on all sides of the issue and beyond were united in saying that's not right, that we put this many resources of our city, unpaid and paid into this issue. So when that starts happening, again, the council has to be doing sort of more check-ins. Some of these things now are called screenings for new housing. They need to do some check-ins, say, how's that going? And it could be through a subcommittee, or it could be eventually just, having them come to council and say, how's it going, or whatever. And when you get into a situation that's as bad as that was, that needs mediation. And I'm not sure who the person is to do it, but I think the council could take action and say, look, let's mediate this thing and get it together. Make sure they're all sitting at the same table. Both sides are still saying that we were never sitting at the same table long enough, because I've talked to both sides. So that's kind of the action that I think would need to be taken on that. And I think you also wanted me to answer how I got to my decision.
Yeah, what values guided you as you were coming to your decision, and how that reflects how you would act on council?
Okay. So there, I never felt that as an institution with its mission that it was going to be, that it made any sense to say, we are now we're going to revoke your cup and you need to go away. That was never on the table in my thinking. A lot of other commentators, not including me, asked if they would do that, and they said no, and that's completely their choice, and I have personally no problem with that at all. I was trying to always make the best decision for the city, which I said multiple times from the dais. I'm not favoring one side or the other. I'm not ideological about these things. We have to make the best decision for the city as it might project down the years. One thing of which was, if the TDM doesn't work and cars start overflowing everywhere, and they might also close the Churchill crossing, we're going to have a major disaster on Embarcadero. And that's not a guess, that's a possibility with some probability. So those kinds of overall city decisions have to be made not based on a given neighborhood, but based on what the impacts are going to be for the whole city. So that was sort of always the guiding point for me. And on either side of that argument, that usually was not the guiding point for the people that were involved in the dispute. And ultimately, I felt that there was a middle road to be taken to allow some enrollment increase, some remodeling, to upgrade the educational situation for the women, and still put some safety net in it for our citizens to let some time play out for the school and also for the entire area that might be impacted by it. So that was what formed my final votes on it.
You were just mentioning mediation. That was my understanding that there were a couple attempts at mediation. Do you feel that the city staff was not adequately sort of in control of the process, or do you attribute the failure in process to the council's, lack of urgency, lack of check-ins?
Well, it might have been both. I really do feel that the council and the staff is a partnership, and there's been some questions about the power of the city manager versus the council. The council are the 7 people that are elected, and as in a board of directors and a president of a company or CEO, there's a lot of give and take and partnerships and suggestions and so on. And if the CEO is not getting a given job done, then the board member generally steps in. So in a situation like that was going on for 4, 5, 6 years and still at loggerheads, somebody needed to step in and sit down and have more generated an actual outcome a lot quicker.
Ed, do you have an opinion on whether part of the dynamic in Palo Alto is that the city staff and its leadership try to read the political winds of the council and the community when forming their staff recommendations?
I would say no, and I'm saying it with a smile because I'm going to say, anonymously, I work with a lot of the city people, and some of the comments that I get is, well, what's the sense of the council? And then the answer is more like, ask one of the 7, and then the second of the 7, and the third of the 7. So I don't think they're trying to, at certain stages of projects in that regard. I do think that even they get a little impatient at the end for these things that just keep going and going and going. And they want them sort of off their plates. But I'm not saying that in that regard, therefore they're making mistakes or doing things early. I'm just commenting on a human factor that when you go back and forth with this, you kind of go, wow, wish we could get this to closure. But no, I don't see that from the folks that I talk with.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of frustrations on their end about the council's handling of some of these complex issues.
Yeah, well, they're not going to speak directly to that, but
yeah. We had one candidate speculate that when describing the breakdown in trust that was part of this Castilleja debate, that the former city manager lost an opportunity to sort of set the stage for a more trusting process and didn't do that by virtue of his not having aggressively enforced the previous conditional use permit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair observation in your opinion?
I think that could be the case. I didn't know you were segueing back to Castilleja with that question, because okay. Yeah, I think that's possible, because there were obvious, violations that were kind of shrugged at. And I think that could have shortened it and, kind of either made them honest or made them change.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about accountability with the police department. There have been, a number of different issues that have come up in which it seems as though there is an incident that happens, there was a lack of adherence to behavioral standards among officers. Change is promised, change is supposedly implemented, and then there's no kind of indication, at least at the public level, what has transpired. I'm thinking in particular of the incident, I'm not sure if you remember it, from 2019, where there was a 911 call and a woman was having a seizure, but because of the police dispatcher's error, there was concern among the officers that this could actually be a mental health case instead. So response to aid this woman was delayed for more than half an hour. It took quite a while for her to get to the hospital.
I don't.
The police chief at the time, promised that training had been implemented to prevent future situations like this. You can see this happening in a number of different cases within the police department. But I guess the question is, it seems as though the council hasn't been able to move forward with trying to get information that would be helpful to the public to know, has training been implemented? Has the situation been ameliorated so that in the future, this kind of thing doesn't happen? And what is your take on, it could be that issue, it could be around racial bias. What is your perspective on what the council should be doing in order to hold the department accountable, seeing as you don't directly, supervise the police chief, of course?
Yeah. Well, as we all know, and this is not an avoidance of the question, but there is a new sheriff in town. So, there's high hopes that he brings us sort of the best of both worlds, which is a transition from being in the police department. So he knows some of the stuff that went on, but a transition to, I'll just call it, better management. And he wants to do that. I've just had one conversation with him so far about that. I think, but getting back to the council, I think the council was very sincere in all their efforts since the Floyd murder to jump in and make some changes. And I think that on paper, they've been great. Now they have to be implemented. And the best way you can implement those changes is to change people so that you have more women officers and more Hispanic and African-American officers, because then that's your colleague group is different. But oversight of what's going on there has to be more vigilant than it's ever been to make sure that any of these changes are not being followed, that there's remedial discipline right away. And so, I think regular reports from the chief, certainly, because I think he is really dedicated to openness, the transparency, and of course the police auditor are absolutely essential. And then with respect to your other question, they've also started to put non-sworn officers in the cars to respond to medical emergencies that are police emergencies that are likely mental health with the PERT program. And there's a money problem of stepping that up to the HOOPS program because it just costs more. But that one, the policeman doesn't even go out, just the mental health official does. And so that sort of dynamic of the threat of an officer with a uniform goes away. And a lot of research shows that it's a much better call. So I think there's commitment there. And I think there's a commitment on the part of the council to give the new sheriff a chance, but I think that's going to be very tight oversight, which is appropriate.
Okay.
Ed, do you support doing away with the binding arbitration and making that a negotiating topic with the union?
I do. It's, as you know, a tough one with the union, but I do.
Okay, thanks.
Gennady, did you have any questions that you want to jump in on?
Well, I was going to ask about fair and biased policing, but I think Ed just answered in response to yours as far as training and hiring more diverse staff. I had a question about an unrelated topic that we touched on earlier, which is Cubberley. I know we mentioned it in passing. there was a panel on it last week that Ed wasn't at because he had a planning commission meeting. So I just wanted to ask what your vision is for what the city should do in Cubberley, and does that vision include housing at Cubberley?
Yeah, so I think that on the one hand, it's sad that the school has sort of stepped out a little bit, but they're still an owner, so they haven't stepped out entirely. And at least we can make some moves there. And I think that Cubberley should be rehabbed. I was at a coffee the other night and said that, and I said, but in spite of that, I was there for a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the vibe there is still just wonderful. All the nonprofits supported by the city, and the building's dilapidated, but they're having fun and laughing and doing their thing. So I said, it's not going to make the cover of Architectural Digest anytime soon, but the spirit of what goes on there is what makes community, and it's still there. So I do support kind of rehabbing that. Of course, the fields and so on are huge draws. It's a draw, of course, it can be a center of community for South Palo Alto, but it's a draw for the whole community. I mean, I don't live in South Palo Alto, and when I had kids, I was there all the time, and I've been to meetings there and so on. So I don't think it has to be, when we do this, I don't think it has to be turned into the Taj Mahal in terms of how much we have to spend on that. It just needs to be furbished and functional, and the nonprofits have to stay. I don't feel it's essential to have housing there. I don't mind taking a look at that, but I don't feel like on that campus, giving up space to get housing in that location is a must-have. I think it's okay, let's look at it, but I don't think it's a must-have.
So refurbished doesn't mean rebuilt, does it? Because the Concordia plan basically called for taking down like the gym and the auditorium, basically building new facilities from scratch. And when I hear you say refurbished, that could mean just kind of maintain current buildings but not replace them. Is that what you mean? Yeah,
I mean, if it turns out that the gym on itself just doesn't work, then okay, you replace the gym, but it doesn't mean you scrape the building and start from scratch. Because time, money, and that's why I started my comments with the vibe. It's already a good place. People are not scared to go there, or trying to make meetings other places. They like it there.
I suppose it's a good time to ask you about the Junior Museum. That seems to have gotten a lot of people lately kind of riled up about the potential for increasing the admission to what people were already concerned about. What's your views on the current status of the Junior Museum? And
I was very concerned about that when I worked on that project when I was on the Parks Commission, because for one thing, it was encroaching into the parks, and we're trying to be relatively sacred about keeping the amount of parkland that we have, and we got it to be smaller. They had offices in there, and I said, put the offices somewhere else. And we took some of it out of Rinconada, but agreed that all the animals with the park wasn't exactly a big problem. We're concerned that for all the money going into it, how are we going to get sort of return on investment in spite of the phenomenal neighbors that contributed to that? I mean, what a great example of public-private cooperation. And now it's coming to fruition. It started at the beginning that way, and the math sort of penciled out that way that they needed to charge like $30 a head, and I was aghast. I was on planning by then, but I was aghast that was the number, because that was never in the plan. And then appropriately, they scaled it back because we said, well, nobody's ever going to come, and now they're saying it again. So not being on planning, not being on parks, I don't know exactly where they're doing their penciling to get to a number, but it's going to keep people from coming. And it's going to potentially even affect, more residents than it is people who love it and have more money and can come here because it's just, $30 a head. Nobody can go there. You take your family, and it's going to cost you $150, and it used to be $0. So that's another tendency that I think we have to look at. And I'll bring up a related example, Bill. I worked unbelievably hard. I was on the subcommittee to drive the golf course renovation, and there was so much good that came out of that. We saving money like crazy. We outsourced maintenance and saved to $200,000 a year, I think it is. We got rid of invasive trees. We created 10.5 acres of land that's still there to use for something in the future for recreational use. But the one thing that I kept trying to guard against was not getting the prices to go up. I said, this is a municipal golf course. We're not putting up Silverado South. We need to have the people who are playing here in their leagues and the youth and so on come out. And now it's through the roof. It's unbelievable. I mean, even with special cards, you spend $72 or $76 for a round of golf. And I'm really concerned, and I mentioned this to some parks commissioners to look into, please, that, we've sort of gentrified the place. And we got to be cautious about that when we're putting up these, phenomenal new facilities, that it's priced within the reach of the people who live here, because that's kind of the point. We don't necessarily have to have anybody come. And of course, the other positive side is that, the golf course was losing money and now it's making a ton of money. So it's hard to argue that, it's covering its replacement cost, its cost recovery plan. And now we shouldn't do that. But, we need to do something for the residents that's much lower than $76. That's the resident rate with a card, $76. So it's another cautionary lesson that I've learned, is even though I worked on it so hard and tried to keep that in place, it just got out of hand. And we need to always be thinking about our own residents.
All right, it looks like we are coming upon the end of our time with you, but Adam, did you want to ask any questions of Ed?
Yeah, just one quick one. Ed, coming into Embarcadero Media right now, one of the things that I want to do is start hearing from the community about what we might be able to do to be more useful to our citizens and residents, and whether or not you have any feedback for us in terms of what we can be doing better, what suggestions you might have about how we could play a more meaningful part in the life of Palo Alto.
Well, even I sort of already answered that first part of that question by saying that you guys just do a phenomenal job by far for educating local voters. And that's so helpful at a time like this. I don't know that you can do anything to get them interested any earlier, because I wasn't getting many knocks. I wasn't getting many answers when I was knocking on the door in July. So there's a sort of a compressed window to do that. But the one thing you added this year was you went to the residents in advance and asked, what questions should we ask the candidates, which I thought was really good. I mean, because they will feel more a part of that process. So, so you got to top that next year and do something else, because that was, I think that was really a good ad. I've thought about it back in the day. Should you sort of be putting, not exactly a poll, but should you be putting in front of them various potential attributes of council members that they would like to have, not to inform the candidates, but to inform them about, think about what you really want here. And I've said before, that I'm an executive recruiter, and candidates, have a certain set of qualifications that you need to meet. And, for this job, I think I really meet all those qualifications. But maybe the disadvantage of what I thought about is that, you don't want to educate the candidates. You're really trying to educate the citizens. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think he would do both, which is not terrible. Maybe it would result in people who have done nothing ever for the city to realize that they're not the best candidate for people to vote for. But to the extent that you could get them thinking about, what is it that I want? Because as you well know, some people, come and vote on some things that maybe are not weighted as the most important thing that council person has to do when they get on the council. So that would be my off the cuff suggestion.
Great. Yes, I was having some of those conversations just now at lunch about how to help the voter sort of parse through this landscape. So, you look at something like housing, and your average voter is not going to be really be in the weeds of all of the Cal State requirements and what it's pushing on the city. And, they might know where they are in the NIMBY-YIMBY scale. But how do they find the candidates that align with where they are on that scale? And how realistic, how can we educate them about sort of the consequences? Like, if you're way over on the NIMBY scale, it's a pretty risky place to be. Okay, maybe you want to sue the state, but that could not turn out great if that's really how you feel. So how do we educate voters to make an informed decision, and what are the actual lever points that somebody on council has to affect the course of development, and how do we get people to understand, like, yeah, that person seems like they've got, you know, the approach that makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, I got a email yesterday from Barack Obama. I'm sure I was one of 10 or 10 million. And the opening there, the kind of the tagline was, elections have consequences. But, you know, it's still a lesson that we have to keep reminding people. You know, you get certain people on there that aren't going to do the job, you got a big problem. And, you know, kind of getting the electorate to embrace that and get up to speed, I think, you know, would help the whole city.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it, and appreciate hearing from you a little bit more than the 60 seconds or the 15 seconds that we gave you during the forum. So
I totally agree. So hopefully I'll have the chance to talk with you over the next 4 years.
Thanks a
that's
lot.
good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.